The snow came down in thick, heavy flakes as Sam Carter gripped the steering wheel, his headlights cutting through the darkness. The road to Blackwood Lodge was winding, treacherous, just like the uneasy feelings settling in his gut. His younger sister Jess was supposed to arrive hours ago. She had left Denver at 6 p.m., texting him that she was just 2 hours away. That was the last he'd heard from her. Since then, her phone had gone straight to voicemail. Something wasn't right. The lodge finally came into view, its rustic wooden exterior barely illuminated by the dim porch lights. The place was eerily quiet, surrounded by dense pine trees that seemed to swallow the night whole. Then he saw it. Jess's car, parked in the lot. His pulse quickened. He pulled up next to it, leaving his engine running as he stepped out into the cold. The driver's side door was slightly ajar. The interior light was still on, casting an eerie glow over Jess's purse in the passenger seat. The keys were in the ignition. Sam's breath came out in a shaky cloud. His sister wouldn't just leave her car like this. Something was very, very wrong. "Jess?" he called out, his voice swallowed by the howling wind. No answer. His eyes darted toward the entrance of the lodge. Did she go inside? Was she waiting for him, or had someone taken her before she even made it to the front door? He scanned the ground. No fresh footprints, just the tire tracks leading into the lot already dusted with snow. It was as if Jess had disappeared into thin air. The cold wasn't just from the weather anymore. It seeped into his bones. A dread so deep it felt suffocating. He pulled out his phone, dialing her number one more time, straight to voicemail. Then the front porch light of the lodge flickered. A shadow moved behind one of the upstairs windows. Sam's breath hitched. Someone was watching him. He wasn't alone. And Jess was still missing. Sam burst through the doors of Blackwood Lodge, shaking off the cold as he scanned the dimly lit lobby. The air smelled like old wood and fireplace smoke, but something about it felt wrong, like stepping into a place frozen in time. The front desk was empty. "Hello?" Sam called out, his voice echoing against the high wooden beams. Silence. His unease deepened as he moved further inside. A faint creak sounded from the hallway to his right, but when he turned, there was no one there. He needed answers. Sam hurried up the grand wooden staircase to the second floor. The doors to the guest rooms were lined up neatly, their brass numbers gleaming in the dim lighting. Room 204, Jess's room, was at the end of the hall. His heart pounded as he reached for the knob. Unlocked. The door swung open with a soft creak, revealing a perfectly undisturbed room. The bed was made, the suitcase still zipped, and the air smelled like the faint perfume Jess always wore. She had been here, but where was she now? Then Sam's eyes landed on the wooden desk near the window. Jess's laptop sat open, the screen still glowing. His breath caught as he stepped closer, reading the last thing she had typed. "Sam, something's not right. I think someone is following." The message cut off. Sam's pulse roared in his ears. Jess had been afraid. She had known something was wrong. He quickly checked the rest of her belongings. Her purse had been left in the car, but her phone was missing. The charger was still plugged into the wall, the cord dangling uselessly. He yanked open the curtains, looking out into the dark forest beyond the lodge. Had she seen something out there? Had someone lured her outside? A cold dread coiled around his chest. Then a soft knock on the door behind him. Sam whirled around, heart slamming against his ribs. Someone was standing in the hallway, watching. Sam froze, his pulse hammering in his ears. Another knock. Slow, deliberate. He stepped toward the door, hesitating for just a second before yanking it open. An older woman stood in the hallway, wrapped in a thick cardigan. Her gray hair was pulled into a bun, her sharp eyes studying him. "You must be Jess's brother," she said, her voice carrying an unsettling calm. "I'm Mrs. Holloway, the owner of the lodge." Sam swallowed the lump in his throat. "Where is my sister?" Mrs. Holloway's expression was unreadable. "I'm afraid I don't know. I never saw her check in." His stomach twisted. That was a lie. Jess's car was still outside. She had made it here. "Someone was watching me earlier," Sam said, stepping out into the hallway. "From one of the windows." Mrs. Holloway sighed, shaking her head. "That would be the man in cabin 6. He arrived 2 days ago. Strange fellow. He asked about Jess at the front desk." Sam's skin prickled. "Asked about her?" "He wanted to know if she was staying here alone," Mrs. Holloway said, lowering her voice. "I assumed he was a friend, but when I told him I didn't have a reservation under her name, he just smiled and walked away." Sam clenched his fists. Who the hell was this guy? Without another word, he turned and stormed downstairs, barely hearing Mrs. Holloway's protests behind him. The cabins were set apart from the main lodge, lined along a narrow gravel path. Cabin 6 was at the very end. Sam reached the door and knocked. No answer. He pounded again. "Open up!" Still nothing. Grim determination set in. He tried the handle. Unlocked. The door creaked open, revealing a dark, musty room. The place was empty. Whoever had been staying here had left in a hurry. But as Sam stepped inside, his breath caught. On the far wall, pinned beneath a rusty hunting knife, was a single Polaroid photo. His sister, taken that night. Sam's fingers trembled as he pulled the Polaroid from the wall. The image of Jess, caught mid-step in the grainy photograph, sent a chill down his spine. Someone had been watching her, and now she was gone. His mind raced. The stranger in cabin 6, who was he? Where had he gone? And how did he know Jess? Sam searched the cabin quickly. The room was mostly empty, but the closet door was slightly ajar. Inside he found a pair of muddy boots, a folded map of the surrounding area, and a flashlight with fresh batteries. His stomach clenched. Whoever this man was, he had been planning something. Then Sam spotted something strange on the map. A section of the woods behind the lodge was circled in red. Next to it, scribbled in messy handwriting, were the words, "Tunnel old mineshaft entrance. At tunnel." Sam grabbed the flashlight and bolted out of the cabin, racing into the frigid night. His boots crunched against the icy ground as he made his way toward the thick tree line behind the lodge. The deeper he went, the quieter it became. The towering pines blocked out the moonlight, leaving only the glow of his flashlight to cut through the blackness. Then, footprints. Sam stopped short, his breath hitching. A set of fresh footprints led away from the lodge, heading straight toward the area marked on the map. Jess's eyes. His chest tightened. She came this way. Sam followed the tracks until he reached a clearing. A rusted metal grate lay half buried in the dirt, its hinges twisted and broken. A deep, yawning darkness stretched beneath it. The tunnel entrance. His flashlight beam trembled as he aimed it down the old, decaying shaft. The walls were lined with rotting wooden beams, and a faint, musty scent filled the air. Then he heard it. A muffled cry. Sam's heart nearly stopped. "Jess?" he called out, his voice hoarse. Silence. Then the sound of footsteps. Not coming from inside the tunnel, but behind him. Sam whirled around, his flashlight shaking as he aimed it toward the trees. Nothing. Just the eerie stillness of the forest, the wind whispering through the frozen branches. But he knew what he heard. Footsteps. Someone had been behind him, watching. He turned back to the gaping tunnel entrance, his mind screaming at him to be cautious, but Jess was down there. He couldn't waste another second. Taking a deep breath, he climbed down. The air was thick, damp, filled with the scent of rotting wood and earth. His boots crunched against the loose gravel as he moved deeper into the passageway, flashlight cutting through the blackness. The tunnel stretched ahead, narrow and suffocating, the wooden support beams groaning under the weight of decades. Faded markings were scratched into the walls, symbols he didn't recognize. Then he saw them. Missing persons posters, tacked haphazardly along the tunnel walls, some yellowed and brittle with age, others fresh. Dozens of faces, all staring back at him. Men, women, children. His stomach lurched. This wasn't just about Jess. This place had swallowed people for years. And then a sound ahead. a faint, pained whimper. "Yes," Sam's voice cracked. A soft cry, louder this time. He ran. His flashlight bounced wildly as he sprinted down the tunnel, past rusted mining equipment and decaying wooden carts. Then, at the end of the passageway, he saw it. A heavy metal door. Slightly ajar, Sam shut it open. Inside, the room was small, lined with old brick walls. A single flickering light bulb buzzed overhead, and there, huddled in the corner, hands tied, eyes wide with terror, was Jess. "Jess!" Sam dropped to his knees, frantically untying her bindings. Her wrists were bruised, her face streaked with dirt and dried tears. "Sam," she choked out, her voice raw. "We have to get out of here, now!" Before he could respond, a low creak sounded behind them. Sam turned. In the doorway, blocking their only way out, stood Mrs. Holloway. She smiled. "You really should have left when you had the chance." Sam's blood ran cold as Mrs. Holloway's smile widened. "You shouldn't have come looking," she said, stepping closer, her shadow stretching across the damp stone floor. "You should have left her, just like all the others." Jess whimpered beside him, her fingers digging into his sleeve. Sam could feel her trembling. They had to get out. His eyes darted around the dimly lit chamber. No windows, no other doors, just Mrs. Holloway standing in their only way out. He hooked his full attention on her when he disappeared back into the distant mazes, and once positioning himself in front of Jess, Mrs. Holloway tilted her head. Because people don't just disappear. They're taken. Sam's grip tightened around the rusty flashlight in his hand. He needed to act. Now. Without thinking, he lunged forward and swung. The flashlight cracked against Mrs. Holloway's temple, sending her staggering backward with a snarl of pain. "Run!" Sam shouted, grabbing Jess's wrist. They bolted through the doorway, feet pounding against the tunnel floor. Behind them, Mrs. Holloway let out a guttural scream, her footsteps thundering after them. The tunnel twisted and turned, the dim beam of Sam's flashlight their only guide. The walls felt like they were closing in. Then, the fork in the path. Jess gasped. "Which way?" Sam's mind raced. Left led deeper underground, right toward the faintest hint of cold air. He grabbed her hand and veered right. The tunnel sloped upward, faster, his lungs burned. Behind them, Mrs. Holloway's footsteps grew louder, her ragged breath filling the space. Then, a light ahead. Sam's chest nearly exploded with relief. The exit. They burst through the opening, crashing into the snow outside. The sky was turning gray, morning. Jess stumbled and Sam pulled her up. They weren't safe yet. A sudden, blood-curdling shriek erupted from the tunnel. Mrs. Holloway charged forward. But before she could reach them, the old, rotted tunnel beams groaned. With a deafening crack, the entrance collapsed, sending a cloud of dust and debris into the air. Silence. Sam and Jess stood there, panting, staring at the sealed tunnel. She was gone. Jess burst into sobs, clutching Sam as he held her tight. It was over. They had escaped. But Blackwood Lodge held too many secrets. And not all of them stayed buried.